The White Sox are going to lose a lot of games this season, so why get frustrated and upset when it does happen? Well, maybe it's because they've had plenty of chances to win, only to have the bullpen ruin everything.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan. I write for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, I know I've said wins and losses don't matter this season yet. Here I was, completely disappointed the White Sox didn't complete their comeback bid because the bullpen could not hold a lead. And let's discuss how the relievers keep ruining everything. Then let's discuss why it's time to stop the comparisons to the 2024 team. And finally, let's discuss who may have to be the roster sacrifice once Andrew Benintendi returns from the IL. Why it might not be Joshua Palacios? And also, does Edgar Carroll's slump mean he may get set down to bring back Corey Lee? All right, so I know I've been preaching a lot that wins and losses don't matter this season. But then games like yesterday happen where I go full out meatball, hoping the White Sox pull out a win, especially after the team fought back from an early 3-0 deficit against the Mariners to take a 5-4 lead in the 8th inning. And actually, they battled back twice. They came back down 3-0 to take a 4-3 lead, and then the bullpen blows it. And then they come back again. And I know I sound like a broken record to everydayers by now, ragging on the bullpen. That's because a third of the White Sox defeats have only come via blowout. That's right. 12 of the White Sox 35 defeats have been by 5 runs or more. So that means 2/3 of the White Sox losses have actually been by a grand slam or less, basically. You hit one grand slam in the inning, it's tied up, you go to extras, who knows? Or you hit one grand slam in an inning, and then you hit another run. Basically, the only time that I could think where, they lost by 4 or less, where it was really not that competitive, is I would say maybe a couple of games in the Cubs series, when they lost 6-2. Obviously, that was just more of an aberration and more of, kind of the White Sox making it not look as bad. But otherwise, for the most part, the White Sox have been in a ton of games this season. And they lead the league in blowing leads with 17. And the bullpen has 7 blown save opportunities. Now, obviously, not all 17 blown leads are on the pen, as the White Sox have actually been really good at getting the lead early, since the offense has actually been effective early in the game. And I also should obviously not totally rag on the bullpen because the offense doesn't produce enough runs, or nor do they do it throughout the game. But when they do, like yesterday, I don't know if you're like me, but my passionate fandom takes over, and I want to see the White Sox win. I want to see the White Sox complete the comeback. Get that W. Especially after Shane Smith cleared another developmental bar. He cleared another hurdle. He bounced back nicely on the mound after giving up a 3-run shot in the first to shut down the Mariners through the next 4 innings. Because, his command, he looked bad through the first couple of hitters. Couple walks, Julio Rodriguez tattoos one, and it's like, oh boy, here goes. And then he settles in nicely. And again, that changeup is just straight up filthy. And then in the fourth and in the third and the fourth inning, you get to see a glorious home run by Tim Elko. And those shots that he hit, they're just glorious. They're fun to watch. Think about that. He is definitely the power bat that they sorely need. I don't know if he's going to hit, over the Mendoza line. I don't know if he's going to be an on-base guy, but he's definitely a slug guy, and you need power in this lineup. And then you also get a nice piece of power hitting by Lenyn Sosa on a 2-run blast. And by that, I mean, put the ball in the air with the wind blowing out. And that's what he did. And then Joshua Palacios saying, how do you like me now? With a solo home run to put the Sox ahead. You should win that game. But then there's the bullpen to ruin everything. And a day after surprising everyone, I'd say shocking everyone, by holding down that 1-0 lead and getting the final 9 outs, the pen could not get the 12 outs it needed, and then the 6 out it needed to basically steal a series victory. Although maybe for the sake of the development process, or at least getting some development data on Mike Vasil, okay, I guess I got to eat, eat basically that the White Sox are going to lose that game, because I'll get to why I'm not totally upset with Vasil being in the 8th. But in terms of how the pen ruined this chance for victory, first it was Brandon Eisert in the 6th, who the night before, that stuff looked really good. And I complimented him on yesterday's show. That ball was dancing. Everything was effective over the strike zone, but he just wasn't sharp. And Cal Riley took him a yard to tie the game up. But then the Sox obviously battled back again in the 7th, and my meatball fandom is like, here we go. Especially with a young core piece like Chase Mydroth hitting a go-ahead 2-run single. And those were the only runs driven in that didn't come via the long ball. Basically, a home run derby, broke out at Rate Field. So 6 outs. 6 outs is all the pen needed to get. Couldn't do that. As Mike Vasil gives up a 2-run blast to Tavares. And, the Sox go from possibly winning a series and demoralizing Seattle. And I watched a little bit of the Mariners postcast here on the Locked On, network, and they were relieved. Seattle breathed a huge sigh of relief, because especially how they have a big 4-game series going up against Houston, and they didn't really want to totally, drain their bullpen. So you had a clear opportunity, and yes, it would have been nice for the White Sox to pour on a few more runs, but they just don't have that talent right now. And the reason why I can't keep getting so upset is it helps the Tankathon standings, but man, the meatball fan of me takes over, and I want to be like, the Sox could have swept Seattle too. They could have. Had Cam Boozer not given up a grand slam in the 8th on Monday. Not saying the White Sox win that game because they lost 5-1, but say Boozer doesn't give up the grand slam, maybe he only gives up a run, or doesn't even give up a run at all, does what he's supposed to do. It's 1-0 heading into the 9th, where the White Sox scored a run. Suddenly you go into extras, and who knows? And if Vasil doesn't serve up that home run ball, you may have just swept and shocked the Seattle Mariners. But I wrestle with, even though the Sox lost, I'm not too upset with the process of going to Vasil in the 8th. And the reason is, again, this season is all about the development of future core pieces. And Vasil, I think, has earned the right to be included, at least in the long reliever role. I think he's already done enough where you're like, I think he could be a very effective long reliever in the pen. And again, the Sox need those guys. They need raised floor guys too, just as much as they need high ceiling guys. You need a long reliever on the cheap. So obviously, since it's all about developing core pieces, why not see what else he can do beyond being a long reliever? And he obviously got a save, in that victory last week against the Reds. And as Steve Stone alluded to in the television broadcast, I think they were going with Vasil, hoping he could get a 2-inning save. And why not see if he's capable of being your multi-inning closer? Because to me, again, how do you judge bullpens? First, can they get 3 outs without giving up runs? Very simple. But then, can you add on in terms of the layers of, like, to me, the best bullpens in the modern era should have a legit 9th-inning closer, just because, again, you got to have those guys that have just extreme confidence, great stuff, because the margin for error is nil. But then it's also nice to have a multi-inning closer. And I know it's hard to replicate what the Guardians did in 2016 with that, but if you can get that type of pen, it just makes your pen more game over than usual, than normal. However, Vasil failed, and it cost the White Sox a win. And that's the conflict. Sometimes trying things out for the sake of development might mean losing. So why does this bullpen usually have to fail, though, in experimentation? I think that's the frustrating thing. Maybe it's because most of them are not good. However, some experiments are working out, at least recently. Like Jordan Leisure, he came on with 2 on in the 7th, got 2 outs needed to escape the inning. He's actually been very good in high leverage situations. Opponent batting average, 226. And with it's a 111 with 2 outs and runners in scoring position. You just want to see more consistency out of him and Isert and Vassell, who's been shaky lately out of the pen, and just basically out of the rest of the pen. Just be consistently better, not consistently bad. Well, one thing the bullpen did last season was blow a lot of saves, 37. But you know what? I'm going to discuss after the break why it's time to stop comparing this team to last year's, and that's next on Locked On White Sox. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. And I'm telling my brother-in-law, who's in the trades, tell your company about Supply House to address all his needs. The benefit that I just described are amazing, and having that personal attention is what all trade pros needs. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right. So through 50 games, the White Sox have the same record as they did during that historic losing season of 2024. But today, done comparing this team to the 2024 squad. And it's for a few reasons. First, this year's White Sox now have 13 games to pick up some more wins to start separating themselves from the 2024 historic losers. Because remember, at this time last year, the White Sox were embarking on that 14-game losing streak. That snapped a franchise record. And who would know that a few weeks later, they would break the record that broke 125, like basically a record for a franchise that had been around for 125 years and nearly broke the AL losing streak record. Second, win more than 7 games in the dog days of summer, because that was how many wins the Sox had combined in July and August. So if you win, obviously if you win more games this month, even if you win 9 games in June, like they did last year, just don't go 3-22 in July. Win more than 4 games in August. You will have a little bit of a better record than the 2024 season. And third, this team has actually, been a lot better, in my opinion, than last year, obviously, already, even though the wins don't show it. They're led, obviously, a lot better than they were last year. That's in my opinion, because Will Venable is at least implementing a standard of how the team should be playing. He's implementing a standard of losing isn't acceptable. He's not saying, hey, let's just flush it. And he's saying it in a very calm fashion when you read his post-game, quotes, or even when you see his post-game press conferences. Whenever I watch his interviews, very calm, very matter of fact, basically establishing a culture of this is how things should be done rather than just flush it, and then being totally inauthentic when you finally do call out the team for being bleeping flat when Kyle Bradish was absolutely just dominant on the mound, almost threw a no-hitter. And if you're one of those that just already don't like Will Venable already, well, refer back to our hero, Ozzie Guillen, who's already said the team is basically better led. I mean, the White Sox had one of the worst managers in the history of their franchise running that team last year. And that's one of the reasons why they lost an historic amount of games. And fourth, you actually have core players to move forward with already on this roster. Mydroth is on a 9-game hit streak. Miguel Vargas is earning core status with a swing adjustment. Edgar Carroll, a bit of a slump, but he has shown he should be the team's everyday catcher going forward. You got Shane Smith, Davis Martin, Jonathan Cannon, all pitching great to prove that they can be in the future rotation. they were not on the roster at this point last year. I don't think Cannon was called back up yet until about midway through the year. I mean, midway through the losing streak. I mean, Nick Nextarini was still up. You definitely didn't have Smith, and Martin was still on a rehab, still coming back from Tommy John surgery. And Sean Burke, if he figures out his command and is more consistent, you feel good about him too. And I mentioned Vassell, maybe Jordan Leisure, if he can string together some good outings, being bullpen pieces. You might even have some competent bridge guys in Lenine Sosa and Tim Elko. And Tim Elko, you still can't rule out potentially being a power hitting first baseman on the cheap on the next good team. And you still have Kyle Teal on his way, and maybe swing school fix Colson Montgomery. So you actually have this thing called, what's it called? Hope in front of you, where last season, hope was just a dream. It was like this myth. It was something in the minor leagues that was a possibility. But you're starting to see real evidence that things could get better. Now, I'm realistic, and I've gone over why on past shows. You should be cautiously optimistic, especially with last year's first-round pick, Hagen Smith, being sent to Glendale to work on his biomechanics. And you got Noah Schultz's command all over the place at AA Birmingham. But at least the White Sox are, for example, being proactive with Smith. And it's probably more of, sending him to Glendale. I think it's more of, let's just look at him. Let's get him in front of the technology. Because it doesn't sound like, the other reason why I think people are like, oh, they're sending these guys to Glendale. Part of it is, I wonder if, Ryan Fuller and Brian Bannister just don't want to be traveling around all over the place. So it's like, hey, set me up in Arizona and set me up in Chicago. Because that's one of the reasons why Bannister's not a coach or a GM. He wants to have some work-life balance. And there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. So I wonder if that, and then I also wonder if they just don't want to have the investment in all this technology. One of the things you could probably still gripe about at Jerry that they have made, they just don't want to buy it in bulk. So they're just going to keep all the stuff in Arizona. So either way, it can't hurt to get Smith to the facility, see why his velocity was fluctuating, try to figure out how can you build up his arm to be able to handle a major league workload. And again, I keep going back to hope, and that's why I'm going to stop comparing this team to the 2024 team, because the vibes are just completely different. And if the White Sox somehow only win 35 games, if you still have the arrow pointed up on these young players, then it's fine. Because also the Sox can now be a part of the MLB draft lottery. Because last year, they didn't have that hope. They didn't even have the hope of potentially getting one of these young stud shortstops available in the 2026 draft at the top of the draft. They could actually get the top pick. And while, yes, the top pick doesn't mean you're going to get a Hall of Famer, there's a lot of good young studs. There is a prize to be won, much like the 2003 Detroit Tigers got. Even though they only got the second pick, they still got Justin Verlander out of that. And the 2018 Baltimore Orioles, you can be in a position to get a dude, a stud. Although I will say this, if the mock drafts pan out the way that they're projecting, and the White Sox do either draft prep shortstop JoJo Parker or Texas A&M Jace Laviette, who crushed a grand slam in the SEC tournament, at number 10, they still have a chance to get a stud player. They still have a chance to get a high ceiling guy. I mean, Laviette, you kind of worry because he did have a bunch of struggles this year at Texas A&M, but man, he can crush the ball. I mean, he is impressive. And since you already passed on Jack Caglione, I think, since you already passed on him, this is a great chance to get a mulligan, to get a stud power hitter. And I will say this, though. I've been watching the SEC tournament. I should have been watching more SEC baseball. I did try to watch as much college baseball as I could this year. Just, with the timing, it was just never easy to, you're watching this. But I have been watching the SEC tournament, and I do want a shot at Alabama's Justin LeBron in the 2026 draft. I mean, I love his profile. And what I love more is, and the broadcast pointed this out, you can add more bulk and weight, actually more bulk to his frame. He's already got some power. He's a smart baseball player too. And you got to, I got to make sure to watch Alabama games next year because I don't want to be an amateur super scout. But I really like, I do believe, I am buying in the hype. And it's not like he was doing these impressive things at the SEC tournament, but he was getting on base. He was running the bases really well. And yeah, you like his twitchy profile that allows him to probably add more bulk. And also 2025 will be different from 2024, just so long as this team can avoid historic losing streaks and double-digit losing streaks 3 times. And the other reason why I'm going to stop comparing is, as I discussed it on yesterday's episode, not much was done in the offseason to upgrade the roster to begin with. Kind of hard to differentiate from 2024 when not many of the better not many of the veteran options that were brought in are panning out right now. So yeah, I'm going to do my best. I can't make any promises. Keyword my best to not compare this 2025 team to the 2024 team anymore. Andrew Benintendi is in Charlotte on a rehab assignment, and Corey Lee still has a few more days on his rehab assignment. At some point, roster decisions will have to be made, and let's discuss why Joshua Palacios might not be the obvious candidate to be DFA'd, and how Edgar Carroll's slump could possibly send him back to AAA Charlotte to bring Lee back. And that's next on Locked On White Sox. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. So the TV broadcast was making it sound like Andrew Benintendi could be back as soon as tomorrow. And if that's the case, someone on the 26-man roster has to be sacrificed because you got to clear a room. So they got to be moved off the roster. And everyone in Sox world would point to Joshua Palacios. Yet, he's been getting a lot of run lately. That's why it makes me think he's not the most obvious candidate. He's played in the last 7 games, and I even heard John Schriffen describe on the broadcast yesterday that the team is trying to tinker with his swing a bit to get something even more out of him. So if they're kind of working with him, maybe he's not the easy choice to be DFA'd. I'm not advocating for him to stay, but I could see them maybe wanting him over Michael A. Taylor or Austin Slater on the roster, or Tim Elko. I still got this feeling in my gut that they're going to move Elko back, saying, well, he still doesn't have a high average, even though he's crushing the baseball. And he's got like 3 home runs in 2 weeks. Also, Edgar Carroll's going through another stretch where baseball has come from him. So now he's got to make the adjustment to the adjustment to the adjustment to the adjustment. But that happens because he has won for his past 12 at-bats. 1 hit in his past 12. And you got to wonder, will this team think maybe some time back in Charlotte to work on maintaining consistent production is a good idea? And bring back Corey Lee, who is hitting well for the Knights in his rehab assignment. But man, I hope not. Because first, think of it this way. Adrian Hauser and Edgar Carroll met each other for the first time at 2 p.m. on Tuesday. That has been acknowledged. That has been a stated fact. And later went on to be a battery for a gem of a game. I mean, think about this. Hauser even, he said, gets into the clubhouse, meets Edgar Carroll for the first time. They sit down during the catcher-pitcher meeting and then a little bit to map out, okay, here's what I like, here's what I do. And then they go out and throw 6 innings of shutout baseball. And then the relievers came in. Carroll is already showing he can be a very good defensive catcher and a very good pitch calling catcher. So let him work through his offensive issues at the big league level. I mean, the only thing that I could think of why you would even ever entertain sending Carroll down is if his slump reaches Andrew Vaughn and Luis Robert Jr. levels. Then sure, get him to Charlotte. Or again, you are going to be like, okay, Kyle Teal is getting close. And we do like Lee, especially with his pop time and his ability to throw out runners and control the running game. Maybe we got to give Carroll some reps at first base. But that's a stretch because right now there's just nothing to be gained for him to go to Charlotte, at least right now, because he's only 1 for 12. Let him work it through. Now, if he's 1 for 50, okay. I get it. But if you're going to cite, well, he's 1 for 12 and he hasn't still hit a home run, I think he's just trying to figure it all out and he's just trying to be productive. I think the power will come. The ability to drive the ball will come. But I would rather just get Matt Theis and Andrew Vaughn off this roster as soon as you can. So maybe you could call up Lee and Kyle Teal and have all three on the roster. Have one guy rotate at DH, have them rotate at DH and catcher. Although I would prefer Teal get some reps in the outfield and at first. That is my one frustration with what they're doing with him at AAA. You've been talking about his athletic profile. You've been talking about how you could have both Teal and Carroll on the MLB roster. And you want both, they're productive bats. So you want both their bats in the lineup. And you've talked about Teal having this athletic profile. Well, get him some reps in the outfield again. Get him reacclimated. Let's not go through this Gavin Sheets and Andrew Vaughn getting baptism by fire in the outfield at the major league level. Let them make it, let them get acclimated when the games, because wins and losses definitely don't matter in the minors. They're nice. They're nice to have because it shows that, hey, you've got this, talented group of guys, but who cares? Development and production, individual production matters at the minor league level, not wins and losses. So if he has to go and get acclimated again in the outfield, it won't matter in AAA. It's not going to affect the big picture. In terms of Palacios, though, I don't think it is inevitable he gets DFA'd unless the White Sox really want to, they are dead set on having a solid late inning defensive outfield, and they really want to make sure that they're just stout defensively. Then they keep Michael A. Taylor. Although he did have a gaffe yesterday, but that was more the elements. But they could realize it was a mistake maybe to bring in Austin Slater. Although, again, it just, this is where it gets tricky because he does hit lefties over his career better than the left-handed Palacios, who's got a 125 average against left-handed arms. So it's going to be hard because, at some point, what do they do? Although I think Palacios is going to be eventually DFA'd. That's the other reason why I'm not advocating for him to stay. I'm just saying let's not consider this a done deal. Mike Tauchman is eventually going to come back. And then Palacios obviously does become redundant, because then you have two left-handed outfielders in Benintendi and Tauchman. So then you don't need Palacios. The only other thing that I can think of is why Palacios is even getting a run lately is they want to have the balance of lefties, but also maybe they're showcasing him to the rest of the league in hopes of, dealing him for the owner's favorite player, cash considerations. That's all I could see them getting in a DFA deal. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. I'll be back tomorrow with a discussion on, has this team evolved from spring training or not, with Adrian Wright of SouthsideShowdown.com and FutureSox.net, as he spent a good week down in spring training. If you go back 2-3 months, he had some great video clips. He watched a lot of the backyard games and that. So I want to get his take on that. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding how the bullpen ruins everything. No longer comparing this team to the 2024 squad. And will Joshua Palacios survive the pending roster shakeup? You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at ToddJDub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. I do try to reply to every email. So if you want to have an electronic pen pal and talk some baseball, I will talk baseball. I will discuss baseball. If we have disagreements, it's okay, but I'm not going to get in a trolling fight. That's the only thing I'll say. But feel free to email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.